Hi, I'm Cindy Allers. We're at my farm, Maple View Farm in Deansboro, and I'll give you a little background. I started my career with harness racing in 1975. I went with a friend to the track, and I was infatuated with the horses. And I've got to jog my first standardbred, and that was Dr. Frank. He was owned by Frank Mundy Sr. and named for Dr. Frank, who was Tony Mundy's brother, who was a veterinarian. He was a $2,500 claimer, and I was terrified to drive him because he was so expensive. As I've learned later in life now, that was the bottom of the racing field. That propelled me to continuing with harness racing for the next 20 years. After I worked for Billy Andrews, I went to work for, excuse me, Jack Bailey, and we got along fine with Jack. Jack was tough. I remember in the afternoons, if Jack was having a bad day, in the afternoon he'd go through the barns after all the grooms had left for the day, and he would check all their tack trunks. And if the tack trunks were not neat, he would tip them over onto the shed row and expect them to be cleaned. I never had one dumped over. Jack and I got along fine. We didn't have any problems with that. After I worked for Jack for a couple of years, I went to work for Dick McCumber. And that would have been in the early 80s. And 1982 was the year of Trim the Tree. And Trim the Tree was a 2-year-old, and Dick wanted me to take care of him because he was a little bit more to handle. He went on that late summer to break the world record for 2-year-old pacing colts in Kentucky at the Red Mile. I raced him at the Meadowlands. He also broke the track record for 2-year-old pacing colts at Saratoga on July 4th, 1982. And he was a nice horse, but he was pretty much the end of my grooming years. I learned a lot from obviously some big trainers. My youngest daughter was interested in harness racing, and she worked summers at the track at Vernon. She was infatuated, but she had a career in college, and she worked at school until she was done. And now her fiance, Jack McNeil, and Lizzie have their own stable at Vernon. So she's second generation. There's so many horsemen at the track whose grandparents and great-grandparents were there, and I was the first in my family. There's no background in harness racing in my family. I was it. So I got out of harness racing, though, in 93. After that, I had a gift shop up in the clubhouse for about 5 years. And a lot of you may remember that. I had a lot of embroidered shirts and things like that that I had for sale. Those were transition years. That's when Justice Cheney was coming in for a while. Mark Scalzo was doing promotions. I was over in the corner where the promotions desk is now for 2 or 3 years, and then moved across the way up alongside the stairs that go up to the Gold Cup room. And I was in that area for probably 3 years. And then I left harness racing. 2013, I came home from work one day, and in the barn was a little tiny miniature horse. My husband and my daughter, I get a little teary because it's so cute, had bought this little horse for me. So Napoleon entered the farm, and he's a little tiny thing, and he was just about a year old. He was just a little bit. He came from Brittany Gale. So he's been here, he's 11 now. He was just a year old when he arrived. So that started my mini collection because, like with any other horse, you can't have just one. Horses are herd animals, and he wanted to be with horses. He was an escape artist. He's very athletic. I had set up a corral with a step-in post, so you know those are 36 inches high, and he would spend about 10 minutes in that corral and he would jump out. Very athletic. He's only 30 inches tall, but he can jump 36 inches, so it's an impressive feat. So we then started the venture of trying to find him a companion. So we ended up finding a mare on Craigslist that was going to auction, and we went up to take a look at her, and she was in a very bad situation. She had a foal by her side, and neither one of them were thrifty, and the entire environment wasn't healthy. I decided I couldn't leave them there, so I bought the mare and the baby, and we brought them home in the fall. The baby was about 8 weeks old, so now I have 3. The following summer, the mama, who had been turned out with a stallion, had a baby on June 21st, which is the summer solstice, and now I have 4. So a year or two after that, Napoleon, who was actually a stallion, bred the same mare, and then I had 5. And then 4 years ago, a friend of mine was trying to give away her mini, and I suggested to her to not give her away. I was afraid they would go to auction, which is what happens to most minis. I said, if you can't find a responsible home, I would take her. So on July 4th, 3 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago, we went and picked her up too. So then I was up to 6. So I have 6 here now, 4 of which I drive. I've trained them all to drive. What I use them for is carriage driving. And carriage driving is very similar to harness racing in that carriage driving came before harness racing. We don't use quick hitches for minis except for race minis. They're so diminutive in size that you can't put weight on their backs. So minis are great for driving, and I have to coach the drivers each time we do the racing to make sure you don't drive like a racehorse, because you can't lean forward and start bouncing. You'll hurt them. Also, I have a couple minis that I use for therapy, where we take them to visit. We haven't done it. COVID, obviously, as with everything, affected what we do. But I did use the minis for therapy. I think one of our best times was we went to the ARC in Oneida and had a visitation with their summer youth program. And the children were so excited to see these minis and be able to touch them and pet them. And minis are not as upset by strange things. They're not worried about wheelchairs or loud noises, fast movement. They take more of that in stride. So they were not opposed to having the children pull on them to pull themselves up or crawl up to them. And I think the best part was there was a little girl that had cerebral palsy, and she was in a wheelchair and non-communicative. And the people there said she does not interact. She moves her eyes. It's the only thing she does. So I took Napoleon up to her when we got ready to do a group picture. And he's so empathetic. He's probably the most empathetic mini you'll ever see. He understands when he needs to be supportive. And he took his little nose, and you know they have little prehensile noses, as all horses do. And he took his nose and he put it on the back of her hand, and he just started moving it. And she turned her hand over, and she turned her head and looked at him. It's amazing. It's amazing. So that's something else that we like to do with them, because we like other people to experience them. We do parades with them, small parades. We've been in a couple parades. I think we've done the Deansboro parade maybe 9 years. Walk them, drive them, depending on the weather. We've done Vernon Center's parade. We've been down to Oriskany Falls. Don't do as many parades, but believe it or not, they love the music. They like when the bands play. Minis are very musical. When the band is playing, they will all trot. When the bands stop, they walk. The minute the bands will start up, they'll start trotting again. They love music. They don't care if there's fire trucks behind them with air brakes. They don't care if they blow the sirens. These things don't bother minis. They have great temperaments, and it's one of the things that makes it great for taking them to places like Vernon for a mini race, because we just pluck them out of what they're used to doing and literally put them behind a starting gate that they have never seen in their life and told them to race. And so we did. And that's where we're going with this. We did that last year. We have more planned for this year. We're looking forward to it. It's exciting and it makes everybody laugh. And I can't believe the number of people. I saw so many people at the track last year with cell phones up, trying to take pictures and video of the minis racing. That's what we want to do. We want to bring more people to the track. We want to attract more people. And my daughter Lizzie was instrumental in this. She started in January, I think, of last year. It was very early, talking to John Horn, like, maybe let's try a mini race, see if we can do it. We volunteered our time. We volunteered the horses, all the equipment. We just left it up to them to pick a spot. It was no expense to the track. It was just to see if there would be any interest in it. And it was exciting. Minis have been around. Recorded history, 1600s. They were owned by royalty and nobility, and they were given as gifts, but they do show up on ledgers that far back. There's recorded instances in the 1700s of them being given as gifts. Around 1880s, late 1880s, they came to the U.S. Around that time, they were being used in Europe, and that's where they originated, They originated in Europe, and they were used in the 1800s up through the 1900s as pit ponies. And pit ponies were anything from drafty-sized ponies up through small horses to be used in the coal mines. And they actually were born and raised in the coal mines, and they never saw outside. And they used the draftier size minis for the areas where the women and children worked. And when the minis came in to do the pit pony work in the mines, the women and children, due to labor reasons, is when they changed that, and the ponies stayed in the mines. When they came to the U.S. in the 1800s, they were being used as pit ponies in this country, also in the Appalachian area. And they were there up through the 1950s, and I think I saw recently there was a record as late as the 1970s where there were still some of these little horses being used in the mines. After that, popularity for the minis started to flourish in this country. They became very popular in the 1980s, 1990s, and the population of minis has increased dramatically. In the early 1970s, 1971, they decided that there should be specifics to the size so that they wouldn't be mistaken for a Shetland pony. Their origins are Shetland. And Dutch and German pit pony. That's where their breeding came from. But they were bred down as much as they could. The smallest mini I know of is 17 inches. And I've mentioned before, the weight range is 100 to 350 pounds. But in 1971, they decided to make a breed registry. And the breed registry, this is one of the few breeds that is height specific. There's no color, there's no other specification other than height. And this was for the AMHR, which is the American Miniature Horse Registry. And at that point, any mini was a horse that was born prior to 1971 would be considered a foundation, and they could be up to 34 inches high. They're measured to the last hair on their withers. So anything under 34 inches was a miniature horse. And then in 1986, they decided to create a second category for minis. So now they have the two sizes. There's an A size, which is anything up to 34 inches, and a B size, which is over 34 inches and up to 38 inches. So the American Miniature Horse Registry has both sizes. The American Miniature Horse Association, which is a later registry than the registry, will only take horses up to 34 inches. That's the max that they will allow. At the farm here, I have both. I have 3 that are A size, and I have 3 that are B size. When the horses compete, miniatures compete, they compete against their own size brackets. It started in January. John Horn was pretty excited about doing this. He said he would talk to the promotions guy, got a hold of Stephen at Vernon, and they worked out a date that we would bring them. And anything we needed to do, I did promotional photos of them. We color coordinated each one. We had 4 minis, and I gave them each a color so that people could go for the color that they wanted. If it's hard to tell them apart, you know. And it was a lot of fun. We had, I think the biggest problem I had coming up with was coming up with enough carts to use, because I have show carts and I don't have enough everyday carts for that. So we ended up using my hyperbike and a couple easy entry carts, and I borrowed one that I ended up buying from somebody else, so I now have enough carts. This year is going to be exciting for the minis. We're really looking forward to it. Last year was just kind of a trial. We had a lot of people come watch mini races. I know people that I know, even my mini's farrier brought her entire family to the track. And the biggest thing with bringing the minis to the track was to increase attendance. Bring people in that have never been there and see how much fun it is, how much fun you can have. Bring your family, because it's so much fun to watch and be able to interact with the horses. And Jeff Gorell contacted Vernon and said he really liked what happened. And so we meaning my daughter Lizzie and I, have been in touch with the other tracks. Lizzie is our point person. She and Jason have been communicating. They've been calling, emailing, and talking about doing racing this year. Jeff owns 3 tracks. He owns Vernon, Tioga, and the Meadowlands. And he asked if it would be possible to get mini races at these 3 tracks. So we're coming up with dates, but be ready, because it looks like we're going to have mini races at Vernon Downs, probably this spring, Tioga, possibly this summer, and the Meadowlands in the fall. Be ready for it. It's going to be fun.